Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Laura Kushner-Key, Executive Editor of Understood, and I'm very excited to announce today's guest. With us today is Ben Foss. Ben is an author and entrepreneur. He's also the founder of Headstrong Nation. He recently published a book called The Dyslexia Empowerment Plan, a blueprint for renewing your child's confidence and love of learning. Ben, good morning. Thank you for joining us from San Francisco.
Good morning, Laura. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to see you again.
Glad to be here.
So I'd love for you to start off by telling us a little bit about your book. I love this book. Our viewers at ncld.org and on understood.org have loved this book. So please give us a little synopsis and tell us who it's for.
Sure. Well, I wrote this book because I was frustrated to find that there wasn't a lot of information that would help parents know what to do if their child was dyslexic. There were a lot of really good books out there that are about what dyslexia is, about the science, and about sort of the educational policy. But there wasn't sort of a practical how-to guide of how to identify your child, how to find their strengths, how to learn to talk to them about who they are and help them own who they are, and really to build a more resilient child. And then also how to talk to your school about it and how to incorporate in technology, which was originally my background in this field. So it was all of these different pieces. And the book has been, I think, well received. It's been out for a little over a year, and it seems to be getting a good, reception. I think actually the head of NCLD, now Understood, put a quote on the back of it. So I was very thankful for that. But I think it's a book that any parent who has a kid who they think might be dyslexic should get. And when I say dyslexia, I mean a much broader category. I picked that term just because there's so many different terms out there. So if the child has dysgraphia or dyscalculia or ADHD, or you're just not quite sure something's not working in a traditional school environment, then this book is probably something that's worth checking out.
Mm-hmm. So that means great for the Understood audience. And you don't only work to help parents of kids with learning and attention issues like dyslexia. Your organization, Headstrong Nation, helps adults with issues like dyslexia.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that organization?
Sure. Well, 11 years ago, I started a nonprofit called Headstrong Nation. It's headstrongnation.org. And the website and the nonprofit is centered around the adult dyslexic community. There's a lot of organizations that focus on kids. It's a very important time of life. But we like to point out that the majority of people who are dyslexic and have other related profiles are adults. This doesn't go away. It's not like, I'm still as dyslexic as I was when I was, 8 years old. And no amount of sort of remediation or cure is going to change that. And in fact, we think you should have the context that you need so you can take control of your life. And we provide that. And the main thing we do is we have stories from dyslexics about being dyslexic that give people that context and help them learn how to talk to a boss or how to learn to use a computer to read to them. Really practical stuff that'll make your life better.
Can you tell us how you came up with the name Headstrong Nation?
I made a film when we first started. We'd found a gentleman named Joe Stutz. So if you go to the website, you can watch it. It's there for free. It's about a 30-minute film that tells the story of who is essentially the Rosa Parks of dyslexia. He fought and won a civil rights lawsuit against the federal government in the 1970s because he wanted to drive a truck for the federal government, and they wouldn't let him because he couldn't pass a written test. And his name is Joe Stutz. He's amazing, and he really inspired me. And I found him to be someone who was headstrong. He had just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And I found that that's one of the characteristics of successful dyslexics, is that we are people who you have to just keep pushing twice, 3 times as hard in some cases because the environment may not be set up well. And so we are a nation, which is to say I experience other people who are in this community as though we're from the same country. It's as though we emigrated and we're like, oh, I know that special food from our home country. There's no dyslexic special food you have to serve at Thanksgiving or whatever. But we have a bond, and it's sort of like we're veterans of the same war. We've been through something that was complicated, and we understand it having been there. We don't have to explain it to each other. And that's a really important moment to find community, because that's a lot about finding your strengths and about liking who you are, is finding other people who are like you. And so Headstrong is we have to push in order to get what we need. And Nation is we are a nation which is actually, frankly, international. When I talk with people in the UK or in Taiwan who are dyslexic, it's a very similar profile.
Headstrong is just such a great adjective, and it's very closely related to what the crux of this webinar is about today, which is how parents can help their kids with dyslexia take control of their lives, how they can help them own it. What do you mean when you say take control? Can you give us the Ben Foss definition of that?
Sure. Well, I think, the book that I wrote, the Dyslexia Empowerment Plan, is a counteraction to being disempowered. And being disempowered is being locked out of things you need: access to education, being able to keep up with your other kids in English class, in a work environment. I have a friend who told me a story about going on job interviews, and he would put a cast on his right hand when he went in for job interviews to make sure that he wasn't asked to fill out any paperwork on the spot and have to sort of fill in his address. And the number of people I know who didn't get jobs at, entry-level jobs, at say Home Depot, because they had some bad grammar in their application, which has nothing to do with being a service representative at Home Depot. But we have this permission that we can just use this as some sort of universal test of people's intelligence. And it's not. I mean, no one's ever won a Nobel Prize for spelling. But somehow that's the most important thing when you're in third grade, is your ability to spell. And then we forget about it, and we focus on your ability to learn. So I think taking control is about first learning to explain who you are. You have to figure out what your strengths are, because this profile comes with lots of amazing strengths. When someone like Steven Spielberg, who recently came out about dyslexia, he's a guy who didn't graduate from college, but he did go on to be one of the most important cultural figures of his generation. And there's a million stories. There's every dyslexic. It's sort of like Canadians. We all know all the famous dyslexics, and there's a lot of them. There's some that I'm not sure are actually dyslexic. Everyone sort of claims everyone as soon as they are a bit of an oddball. But General George Patton or Whoopi Goldberg or people who I've heard say out loud, "I am dyslexic." There's a lot of us, and in the general population, we're somewhere between 10 and 20%, depending on who you believe. So control is about you getting to pursue your dreams and to be able to be successful on your terms, and that's, I think, anything you'd want for your children or for your friends.
I love that story about the cast. I want to pause for a moment and just tell our viewers that next to the video, there's a chat box. So as we're going through this interview, if you have questions for Ben that come up, please feel free to post them. When Ben and I are finished with our interview, we would love to take questions from you that you have for Ben. So going back to that idea, I love that cast example. So sometimes when you and I talk, when I use the word reading, I've noticed that you'll occasionally correct me and you'll say, "Do you mean eye reading or ear reading?" And I think that that's a great example of how you take control. Let's define terms on our own grounds. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means to you?
Well, language is very important. And if you look at any group out there, the group always tries to own language about itself. So people with disabilities or people of color, there's language that gets used to describe who you are. At the turn of the century, the last turn of the century, not the 21st, but the 19th, when a woman expressed any emotion, she was hysterical, and there was a medical condition called hysteria. Well, I think in the same way, there's now a medical condition called dyslexia. We're listed in the DSM-4 and 5. There's a diagnosis. There's medical language that gets used. Reading is one of the most powerful, and we talk about reading as though it's one uniform activity. Blind people use Braille. I call that finger reading. So they are reading with their finger. We would not say that someone who's reading Braille is not reading. They are doing, actually, in some ways, I think most people would perceive a more complex task with their reading. In the same way, I use audio. I listen to audio at an insanely fast rate because I've trained myself to do that. And that is a situation that most people wouldn't experience as reading, but I do. And it allowed me to go through law school and business school with people who were reading with their eyes. And I don't mean to say eye reading is bad. It's a really useful skill. So is being able to go upstairs. It's a great skill. It's important to teach your children to do it, but not everybody can. And does that mean we would leave the children who can't walk upstairs out of the school? No. Does it mean that we would leave the kids who can't read with their eyes, either because they're blind or because they have dyslexia, out of the school? No. We should come up with language, and we should own terms that make it even. And so someone can be a great eye reader. Awesome. Go. And someone can be a great ear reader. Awesome. Go. And like, both of those exist. And in supporting that, I think you're sort of standing up for yourself or for your child, and making it part of the public narrative.
Sometimes we hear from parents that their kids are getting bullied or getting picked on because they use accommodations, like using audiobooks, and kids will say that they're cheating, for instance. What would you say to parents who are faced with that situation? How can they approach that topic with their child?
Yeah. Well, I think it comes back to context and to owning it. Bullying is a serious problem. Look at the environment in which kids operate. They're in a school system. They are identified at an age when kids are trying to figure out who they are. And in that space, people are often mean. On a bus in third grade, people will come up with anything they can pick on, your height, your weight, your name, what part of town you're from. All of that is fair game, or at least it comes up. And so if you're in a school system where every time you need to read, you either don't do well, or you get segregated and pulled out of that environment, which are two sort of common experiences, other children are going to pick up on this. And unless the school actively challenges those stereotypes, you're going to have some baggage to work with. Now, if a child can own their dyslexia, if a child can be able, for example, to demonstrate speech on their fancy phone, then you've got the ability to do something that would change that narrative. We didn't rehearse this ahead of time, so it's always a danger to do something like this. But I can pull up an email and read it to you as an example. So here's an email from Network Solutions. Or whatever, here's Benetech. They're one of your things. They're in my inbox.
Our founding partners, yes.
One of your founding partners, yes. Or as I technically call them, your things.
That works too.
Yes. So I can take this device and I can highlight it on the screen. So I've just highlighted some text, and this is built into every cell phone. It's in iOS. It's in whatever. And you'll see this little button here. It says speak. I'm going to read this. It's going to be super fast and super hard to understand for you.
You can usually find the latest New York Times bestsellers, technical manuals, cookbooks, children's storybooks, and more. But did you know that even with over 300,000 titles, thousands of members are still waiting for Bookshare to add the books they want to read? Yes, many great books still just aren't available in our collection. But we are doing all we can, and with your help, we can do more. Your support will enable us to add more user-requested books into the collection, to develop more math accessibility, and bring books.
So there are 300,000 books in their collection, and they're trying to develop more math books, and they want money. Like, it's a fundraiser. So I follow that with ease because I've spent years practicing it. And that's how I read. And for the non-dyslexic person who is an eye reader, don't worry, Laura, I can slow it down for you so that you can keep up with the rest of the class, which is, essentially what we're doing. So I'll back down the rate, and then I'll make it, I'll just reread the same thing. So now I've changed the rate, and now I'm going to hit the little button, speak again.
New York Times bestsellers, technical manuals, cookbooks, children's storybooks, and more. But did you know that even with over 300,000 titles, thousands of members are still waiting for Bookshare to add the books they want to read? Yes, many great books still just aren't.
So, that's now, this isn't just a party trick. This is about taking control of your life. When you read with your eyes, you read at 3 times the rate most people listen to audio. And if you actually took the amount of text that we consumed, I consumed about 3 times as much text as you consumed in the time that audio was reading, because I was going at 3 times the rate. It's just super simple math. That's time not doing anything else in your life. That's time focusing on this task. And so if you're in school and every school is assigning an hour a night of homework, you have 3 hours of homework. Or if you're in a workplace and you have to read some big memo or email, think about the amount of time people spend in their email every day. Well, it's 3 times longer if you haven't learned that skill. And one of the things we've done at Headstrong is headstrongnation.org has videos on how to do this and how to turn it on in an operating system and how to learn how to do it. Similarly, in the book, we talk through a lot of different technologies in the empowerment plan. So those two pieces are just a concrete example of where empowerment comes from understanding yourself and then understanding your tools.
Thank you for doing that demo. Very brave of you to do it on the fly like that.
Yeah,
it reminds me that we do on our site also have a tool called Reading Assist. So I just wanted to remind all of our viewers that you can have all the text read aloud and you can speed it up, you can slow it down to whatever your preference is, just as Ben showed you right there. But I just want to go back and let you know that it's so refreshing to hear you talk the way that you talk, because I think that, and I learned this from you, that too many parents or kids, people with dyslexia in general, they make their dyslexia about their shame as opposed to strengths. And I think what we just had up on the screen was one of your blogs that the viewers can find in our blog called The Inside Track. And this is a really popular blog post for us, Make Dyslexia About Strengths, Not Shame. Can you maybe sum that up in your own words right now? What do you mean when you say that?
Well, I think, every human being comes with a bunch of strengths. In the context of dyslexia, it's important to find those strengths and play to them, because you're going to be in a default world having a really hard challenge. So think of your brain sort of like a physiological, geography. And if getting information in a certain path is really difficult, like if it's a mountain pass with snow and there's snipers on it and it's just a nightmare to get through, you can't get as much information through that path, versus if you have another path that's like a sunny meadow. So it might be that reading with your eyes is that, and it might be that kinesthetic learning is, instantaneous and super fast. I have friends who are very mechanical who can, model entire engines in their minds. They can have the piston and the cam and the flywheel and everything moving in real time and be able to anticipate how much energy they need to put into the system to achieve some result. We have sophisticated computer software that can't do that. And the intuitive knowledge that comes with that is in some ways deprecated or diminished often in our culture. I think shame is feeling as though you're unworthy because you have some characteristic that is unacceptable to the world and really unacceptable to yourself. Shame is very scary. It's very lonely. And I think, unfortunately, frequently people will enforce shame around dyslexia. You'll see people break eye contact when they talk about it. They'll say, "Oh, I'm dyslexic," and they'll lower their head like that. And that immediately is the physiological expression of shame versus like excitement or joy, which is like, and you never see people say, "I'm dyslexic." Like that doesn't come through. It seems funny, but it's actually, that should be the response we have. A kid should be like, or an adult should be like, "I'm dyslexic." Like, that's exciting. And if you can model that and feel it actually for yourself, but it takes work. I did a TED talk, which you can look up. It's just Ben Foss TED, Google it. And it's about this concept. And it's about figuring out how to own that and then to put it down and to focus on the strengths.
We do that at our office. So there is one place. So if someone says, "Oh, I'm dyslexic, I have dyslexia," we go, "Oh, that's great. Do you want to, let's talk.
Tell me more."
Yeah. So something else that you've blogged about is kind of fears that parents might have when they find out or they suspect that their child has dyslexia. And, I imagine it's a very powerful thing that can get in the way of helping parents help their children embrace what's going on. Can you give us an example of some of those secret fears that parents might have and maybe give some encouraging words of how they could realign with their thinking?
Yeah, I think a lot of what parenting is about sharing a bond with your child, and frequently parents want to share a bond over things that they have enjoyed. So, a mom who enjoys fishing wants to take her kid fishing, or a dad who plays baseball or soccer wants to teach his kid to play baseball or soccer, and often the kid will enjoy it. If an adult is someone who is easy with text and who loves books, the way my mom and my dad is a bit dyslexic. My mom for sure is is a book person. She's an editor. Like, she works editing manuscripts. And she, for years, I think, wanted me to have access to text in the way that she did, because she associated it with things like, reading a book at night in her bedroom when she was a kid with a flashlight, or being able to sort of go off into the world of Shakespeare, or the world of Treasure Island, or the world of Hunger Games, something that's exciting. It also has real social capital today. If a kid is not reading The Maze Runner or, Harry Potter or whatever the latest young adult fiction novel is, then they can't kind of keep up in the conversations that are happening at the school. In the social conversations, not the conversations they're graded on by their teachers, but the conversations they're graded on by their friends. And I think a parent who is holding on to old visions of what their child should be, and that word "should's" a nasty one, that is actually, the parent, I think, needs to do the work to let go of that history and to really look at who their child is, and to ask their child, what would make this better? What would make it better? And that could be as simple as, in the morning when they're having a hard time getting out of bed because school's been really tough for them, let them choose whether they have cornflakes or Cheerios. Let them have a cup of, hot tea with some honey in it, or whatever it is that's going to make them feel better that morning. Let them do it, and let them then go into school a little more prepared and a little more loved. So the fears that I think come up are, my child's not going to be like me. My child will never fit in. My child will never be like the other kids. And the answer is, your child will not be like the other kids. They'll be like 10 to 20% of the kids. And the child will not be like you. That's kind of the other half of parenting, is that children are not like you. And if they were just like you, it'd be pretty creepy. Like to have just a mini running around. And just engaging that and realizing that you can put those scripts down is a big part of it. And I think a lot of that has to do with not fighting who your child is. And as an adult, it can be more complicated, because oftentimes these stories have been around for decades. You might have been the brother or the sister who is the dumb one, or you might be the athlete of the family, but nothing else. And those stories stick and influence how people interact for their entire lives. And you got to start by owning your own half of it, and then you can bring in other people once you're really solid in who you are.
If I remember correctly, your mom was very supportive of you when you were in college at Stanford Law.
Well, I was sorry. I think I know the story you're going for.
Please help me out. Yeah.
the facts. So that was college. So when I was in college, I went to school at Wesleyan University, and at the time, I would fax my term papers home to my mom in New Hampshire and have her read them to me over the phone, so that I could find mistakes in the text that I had made. And this was a backup. I had a person on campus that I went to, but at that time, there was no disability center. This was the mid-early 90s. The law actually said there should be one, but there hadn't been enough sort of catching up with actual policy to what the law said. And as a result, I needed someone to help. Now, the interesting thing about it is that I also, at that time, really wasn't telling anyone on campus I was dyslexic. I was really scared that I was going to not fit in. It's a hard time when you transition to college. You want to be, kind of one of the people that people like. And the idea that I would have to, in college, to go to my roommate or to other friends and say, I can't find my own spelling mistakes. Can you please read this out loud to me? The energy I had around it then was really scared and hidden and didn't want any, versus being like, hey, interesting fact, I can't spell at all. And I'd be really appreciative if you could come in and help me with this, because otherwise I'm gonna totally drop the ball on something silly. And people would have been like, oh yeah, no problem. But I had a story that they were gonna say, you don't belong here, and I don't, and why would I want to be friends with those people? So my mother was very helpful there. My father was very helpful in other ways. He used to take me to the library to get records down in the basement for audiobooks. I used to listen to Treasure Island and Shakespeare and all kinds of things. So both my parents really focused on finding spaces where I could learn by my strengths.
Another way to take control of your life and to own your dyslexia, and we've talked about this too, is to just have fun with it. I was wondering if maybe you could give us an example of how you have fun with your dyslexia.
I love going out to restaurants with other dyslexics because we all have these little tricks that we use to order off the menu. Because obviously, if you read the menu, you're not going to necessarily read it accurately. And it's fun to actually kind of bring those secrets into public and discuss them. So about 2 years ago, we have a retreat where we bring together a lot of leaders in the dyslexia world that Headstrong Nation hosts. And we had a table with about, I don't know, a dozen of us in this restaurant. And the waitress came up and she said, okay, so I'll take your order now. I was like, before you start, I just want to let you know, none of us can read. And she was like, ha ha ha, and I was like, no, seriously, like this is going to go poorly. And what's going to happen is you go around this table, we're all going to interrogate you about what's on the menu. So you might do better to just stop and like tell us what the specials are and what's good. Well, she didn't believe me, and she started around the table. Eventually, one guy showed up late, and he came to the table like the 13th guy, sits down, and he starts to do exactly what we all do. He's like, so, do you have any? And she's like, hold on, I get it. You can't read. Let me explain what's on the menu. No big deal. And he was like, oh, that's really nice. Thanks. And it was just like, we were easy about it and having fun with it and making fun of ourselves and with no stress or pressure over it. So that's an example. If life gives you melons, you might be dyslexic.
I love that example, and I'm going to put you on the spot here. Any ideas for how a parent might be able to have fun like that with their third grader, their fourth grader?
That's actually a really good question. I would not leap into making fun of their spelling. I think it would be a terrible idea. I think you start by having a self-deprecating sense of bemusement about your own, profile. So if a parent can joke about the fact that they're always late to things or that they're super on time, or like just be jokey about things that are their little picadillos and their context, then I think it gets easier. I think humor is sort of a couple steps in. You have to first identify it, name it, give it context. But the body language that parents carry around it is going to inform how everyone receives it. If you say to your child on the first day that they're identified, so we got some information about how you learn. Let me walk you through your strengths and your weaknesses. But before we do that, let me tell you about my strengths and weaknesses. I'm really good at math and I'm incredibly blah, 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 but I'm terrible at doing painting, blah, 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 blah. You're really good at listening and at being someone who's really social, and you have a hard time when it comes to spelling. Look at that. Like it becomes just a very even approach. Then that gives you space later to joke about it and to have it be easy and fun. And people, I know moms in particular who are in households where everyone else is dyslexic and they're not, right? Their partner is, their kid is, and it just becomes the running joke that like they're the one who is going to be called on for spelling at all times. I have in my life, this is one I got from David Flink. I saw his webinar on your thing earlier. I learned a great phrase from him in college. He talked about dating for spelling, that he would always like find partners who were really good at spelling and grammar because he needed the support. And I envision, myself in college being like, so what's your major? Oh, you're an English major. Oh, really? That's great. Or someone's in, physics. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, I can't talk to you. Got to go on. But just being light about it. I think the lightness comes once you've owned it. You don't want to jump to lightness because that's sort of an affectation. And joking with someone about something they feel is a serious issue is dangerous.
That's a really important point. Thank you for that.
Sure.
I feel like you and I could talk all day, but I want to make sure that we have some time to get to the questions from people
Great.
on Ustream, and I'm happy to see a lot of questions coming in. So
good.
If it's all right with you, I'm going to just jump right into that. My attention will go to my laptop for a minute so I can read this question. This question comes in from Nancy, and Nancy asks, do you have any suggestions to enlighten a teacher who is not open to UDL or testing in a way that works for my son's learning style?
So UDL, for those who don't know, is Universal Design for Learning, which is to say build a ramp into a book, like make it so anyone can walk into that space and use it and don't, have like special back paths for people to get in there. How do you deal with a teacher who's not on board? Well, I think you start with honey, and then you move to a stick. So the honey is, before the school year even begins, I would build a relationship with the teacher. I think a great model is for kids to learn to tell their story, and for kids to start using their own advocacy to put together a story that can be reported and brought to the teacher. There's a wonderful group out in Denver called YES. It's Youth Examples of Self-Advocacy, and they have every second grader, third grader, fourth grader put together PowerPoint presentations that they take into their school and show who they are. And they're not just like, dull PowerPoint. They have like little videos of them playing soccer, or they have their favorite music playing in the background and photographs of them with their puppies. And then they also say, I'm really good at this, and did you know that dyslexia is in the brain, and I'm dysgraphic and I have difficulty using a pen, and therefore I'd like to use a keyboard instead of a pen. I think the specific question you asked about was cheating, and I would say really the inverse is true. You're cheating a child if you don't give them access to this stuff, and worse, you could be turning a child into a cheater if you deny them access to this material. In my own life, before I had accommodations and supports, I have experiences where I cheated. I remember when I was in college, I took calculus and I did not have accommodations. And my first semester, it was a nightmare. It was a series of Greek and Latin symbols that I didn't know how to use. It was a 300-person lecture class with a thick textbook that I couldn't get through, and I didn't know to use audiobooks at the time or to even ask for help. Because in high school, I'd been really good at math. I'd been an honor student because my teacher had worked the problems on a whiteboard with me, so I totally understood the nature of mathematics. And I scraped out a B by writing some formulas in the back of my calculator and quit the class halfway through the semester or through the year. I dropped out after getting 2 of my 4 units, embarrassed that I had done what is really an unethical thing. And I can look back at it now and see I'd been put in a corner and I had scrapped my way out. And I don't recommend this strategy. But I think it's important to recognize that not providing these accommodations equals encouraging cheating. Now, final thing, if you do read the Dyslexia Empowerment Plan, there's whole sections on how to talk to your school. And it's about building a relationship. It's about being positive. There are scripts on how to address specific pushback that you'll get, ranging from, look, your kid is so smart, they don't need accommodations. They're not having any trouble. That's one common pushback. To, sorry, we don't have the budget this year. We're really sorry. There's just not enough money to do it. To, we're not sure he's really dyslexic, so we're just going to wait a year. Those are really common things that people will say, and often it's a tension over resources. There is a chapter on the law, and understanding the law and being able to use it is very important. You don't have to be a lawyer, but you have to know to say things like, is it possible that Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act might be relevant here? And that immediately will let them know that you know what you're talking about. And just a few simple things to be able to bring up can completely change the conversation. I wouldn't open with the law. It tends to put people on their heels. But if you really hit a barrier, it may be necessary to raise that issue.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm
Sure.
going to go to another question. This one from
Great.
an anonymous user. I'm going to just read this aloud. It's a little bit of a longer question, so just bear with me. As an adult dyslexic who found out about my dyslexia when my child was diagnosed, I notice I have a lot of issues to unpack. What suggestions do you have for adults to work through those issues? Adult dyslexics seem to be the forgotten population. What resources are available for adults? So we have a couple of questions within that question.
So that's a really, first off, let me just say to this person and to anyone else who's in that space, I was there. Absolutely, I was there. This was a secret that I knew I was dyslexic. I was identified when I was young, and I held it as a state secret through all of high school, through college, through my first couple jobs. I worked in really high pressure environments and didn't tell anyone, or told like one person. And it was only when I got to law school that I hit this wall that was just insurmountable in terms of not having the accommodations I needed in place. And so I began talking about it, and I saw a shift in how everyone approached it. Everyone suddenly was like, "Oh, that's all? Okay, yeah, we'll work with you on that." The level of, so that's one half. The other half is you have tremendous strengths. Like, you are not in your life doing what you do without having adapted, and you're probably undervaluing how adaptive and resilient you have been. And one of the things that happens is people tend to dismiss what they're really good at. Like, but that's not a big deal. That's, like one of my skill sets is public speaking, and I am completely fine getting up in front of 10,000 people with no notes and just working off the cuff. In fact, I enjoy it. And when I talk to friends about that, they're like, "You're crazy," versus being able to file the most simple, accounting or tax form, I'm like melting down inside as soon as that's something that's asked of me. And all you need to do is find people who are good at accounting and taxes and let them handle that. And then you handle the public speaking. And whatever it is, it might be that you're a visual artist. It might be that you're a great storyteller. It might be that you're good at music. There's a thing you're really good at, and make your life more about that and less about the other thing. The final thing is I would strongly encourage you to go look up that TED Talk that I just mentioned, because there's a really specific set of exercises that I recommend to identify and then release the experience of shame, and to put it down and move forward. It's going to take you have to reach outside your comfort zone by about 10%. You want to do that. And it's also first acknowledging it, that you might have some shame around this. And the thing is, everybody has some shame. If you don't, you are a psychopath. Like, that's clinically established. If you have no shame in your life, then you are a psychopath. And so it's just figuring out what it's about and letting it go. And the good news is there are resources and there are people who are like you. And so I'd check out headstrongnation.org. And even if you're an adult without a child, I would encourage you to get the book. There's an audio version. It's available on audible.com. And you can also look it up on Bookshare or Learning Ally, or, in a bunch of other resources. Often your local library will have books on tape. So there's plenty of things you can do.
Thanks, Ben. We had an anonymous user, actually, I think this person is replying in response to the question you answered previously from Nancy.
Yeah.
And this user says, having teachers go through a simulation can be a powerful way to get them on board with accommodations and grading appropriately. I think this user might be referencing our Through Your Child's Eyes tool on Understood, which is very powerful and can really shed a lot of light on issues for people who may not understand or believe in what a child has.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other thing I found is really effective is to show brain scans. People really react strongly to science, and showing MRIs. There's, you can look them up. There's some on the Headstrong site. There's actually a handout that you can print out and take and show people. And I think that tends to sort of shift the terms of debate when you're dealing with science. So I think those are both great ideas: the simulations and the science.
Here's a great question. I'm not sure how to pronounce this user's name, so I'm just going to say the last part of it is Bruni. So this is coming in from Bruni. Any suggestions on how to convince a high schooler to utilize assistive technology to free up cognitive energy? It seems the thought of learning something new is daunting, and my child is off to college next year. So congratulations, child up. That's great.
Yeah. What you're talking about is really common. Very important to a very common phenomena for students who have been identified. I don't know if this high schooler has an IEP, an individualized education plan, and is in special education, or I had one through most of elementary and into middle school, and then I was mainstreamed, and so I stopped having accommodations when I got to high school. But by the time I got to college, I was like, I'm done with the special ed room. I'm not telling anybody about this. I'll be fine. And that often is a really bad idea, because you sort of stepped off a cliff, or the bar has been raised. And frequently, they always say in college, the people who didn't make it to college aren't there anymore, so the bar is just higher. Now, what do you do? I think it comes back to the sort of core issues of learning to own your dyslexia, figure out how you are. I would encourage your child to watch the film that's on the Headstrong website, just as context to who they are and where they come from. It's a context and a history. It's sort of the equivalent of like a child of African American descent going through Black History Month. Like, you get a sense of like where you come from and who you are and why you're different. Or you're not different, you're just in a particular culture where you may not be in the majority. The other thing I would say is focus on strengths. So if they're good auditory learners, that's the technology you want to use. They may not be. Not all dyslexics are really comfortable with audio. It could be that kinesthetic, they're very visual. So it might be that their chemistry class, they should be putting together three-dimensional models of molecules, not working in a book. It might be that they are not really interested in going to college. I'm not speaking about your child per se, but plenty of uber successful dyslexics didn't go to college, and yet we want everyone to go to college. And I think that's an assumption on its own right. The other thing I would say is that if you really want to get people adopting these technologies, start with things that are fun. Don't start with, the economics or social studies textbook. Start with, if they're into skateboarding, if they're into skydiving, if they're into traveling in France, find content that's about that and focus on that. Again, Bookshare, Learning Ally, great resources, audible.com. You can find really rich, interesting stuff. One of my favorite stories was a story of a kid who used this product I made a number of years ago called the Intel Reader. And you could take a photograph of anything printed and read it aloud. Well, what did he read? Sports Illustrated. Why? Because his older brothers, were always talking about Kobe Bryant, and he wanted to be able to participate. And one day he mentioned that Kobe Bryant's knee injury was going to take him out for 3 weeks, and there was a new, study or MRI or whatever. And they were all like, "Wait a second, have you been reading?" And he was like, "Yeah, I have." And when you get knowledge that empowers you and you can teach with and that you enjoy, then the thing becomes attractive. And so I would strongly encourage you to find the things that your child cares about and then add audio or add other alternative ways of learning to that, and make it into something that is fun. And then once you've mastered the skill set of that thing, you can shift over and start using it for mainstream stuff.
Great. We're going to take one more question.
Okay.
This came from another anonymous user. It's a short question, but I think that there are a lot of layers to it. How do I help my child learn a foreign language? Now, you may not want to talk about, or maybe you do, to talk about how the actual mechanics of helping your child learn a foreign language, but maybe you could shed some light on how to approach talking about what could be a very difficult task for this person's child.
Well, I'd begin with the assumption of why do you want your child to learn a foreign language? And I'd start with the question is, look back at yourself and look at your goals. Is it to have them be an intelligent person who's met some requirement? Maybe that's not such a great idea. And I don't mean you can't learn a foreign language. I'll give you an example. I am really good at picking up accents and at picking up foreign language in a spoken context. I can go to, меня зовут Ben, как дела? Сколько ты стоишь? Like I can drop into a language fairly quickly and learn the basics. Where I run into barriers is if you ask me to start reading Cyrillic and spelling in Cyrillic, it's going to be a disaster. And there's a story in the Dyslexia Empowerment Plan about my high school experience with foreign language. And what happened was I took French. The first year French, I got an A. Why? Because it was all verbal and it was all, doing dialogues and, learning structures of language. And I was like sucking it in super fast. Year two, we went to spelling, and there's something in foreign language where like they seem to have missed the last 50 years of educational pedagogy about how you teach grammar and spelling, because they're stuck in these like paper and pencil worksheets that are like really tedious, and it's not the way we teach this stuff even in English anymore. But somehow in French or Latin or whatever, it's fine. I think in those contexts, you really have to have a sit down with the kid and let them learn to advocate for themselves about what they want, and they need to want this. And if they really want to learn French, they'll learn French. And you then need to adapt and do audiobooks, you need to do ear reading, you need to do all these other things around it. the story in the book is of my mother going in and going to war with my French teacher. I mean, going to war was having 3 meetings and being frustrated. And the French teacher just wouldn't budge. She just wouldn't have it. Like, there's a way you do it. This is the way you do it. If you're not doing it, you're not in my class. And so what happened was I got like a C in that, maybe a B minus. I don't know, whatever. I didn't do well my second year. What did I do next year? Spanish 101, because it was back to early, so I now have rudimentary Spanish spoken, and that's how I've approached it in my own life. You can learn to manipulate written text in foreign languages, but it's going to require a lot of these tools. And in English, I use a great tool called Ginger to do my grammar and spelling. Find the French version of that. I don't know what the French word for ginger is, but look it up and you can probably figure it out.
Me neither, and I should, because I've been taking French classes, but I don't actually know. This user chimed back in just to add a little color to the question, and he or she said that the child is taking it because it's a requirement for high school graduation, and that he or she has read your book and knows that you recommend sign language, but what if that's not an option? So I think a lot of the information that you just gave, this person also doesn't, his or her son or daughter does not qualify for an IEP or 504 plan.
That's a challenge. Without a 504 plan, you don't, or an IEP, you don't have a handle to challenge the requirement. If it is such a barrier, and this is a challenge, like we're in the weeds here, but it might be possible to have your child evaluated in the context of the foreign language requirement specifically and get it waived, because while their form of dyslexia or whatever their learning profile is might not be significant enough to register them for accommodation in mainstream, it might be true in the way that a child can be dyscalculic and have difficulty with mathematics but be totally fine in English. So it might be a question of dialing in the specific. My guess is if they're in high school and this is a requirement for graduation, we're kind of getting near the end of the funnel of the formal education that they have to do. And I would look at some of the techniques that I talked about, looking for accommodations that would allow them to do it. It sounds tough. It sounds complicated, and I think the real question is figuring out how to build a relationship with the school where you might be able to broach this topic and change their worldview about it. But I feel that's a complex issue, and I think it's really about figuring out how your child can learn, what parts of it they can learn.
Ben, thank you so much. It is
You're
so
welcome.
great to talk to you again. Again, I think that we could talk for hours. I'm sure that our viewers would love to be able to have you answer all of their questions, but unfortunately that's all the time that we have for today.
Okay.
So maybe we can do this again sometime.
That'd be great.
I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. So
thank you very much. Have a great Thanksgiving as well.
Thank you.
And thank you for the time, Laura, and thanks to Understood.
Absolutely. And thanks to all of our viewers. Please chime in 2 weeks. Our next webinar is called IEPs in the Trenches. Thank you.